Attention, listeners. Do you ever find yourself struggling to decide what to watch on a Saturday night when you're in the mood for horror? Or perhaps you're trying to round out your own horror film education. In either case, I'm sure you'll be able to make some great discoveries in my 10 by 10 horror watch list, featuring a breakdown of the 10 favorite horror movies from 10 renowned horror directors. We did a deep dive of the favorite horror movies from directors including Guillermo del Toro, Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Quentin Tarantino, James Gunn, Rob Zombie, Martin Scorsese, and many, many more. Here you'll find a collection of each director's favorite horror movies, along with quotes about what they appreciated about the films, all in an easy-to-reference PDF that you can download absolutely free. Featuring a mix of well-worn classics and deep cuts, hopefully you'll discover some overlooked gems and look at old classics through new lenses. Download the 10 by 10 horror watch list for free by visiting nicktaylor.com/horror guide. That's nicktaylor.com/horror guide. Welcome back to the Nick Taylor Horror Show, episode 100. As always, each episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show explores how today's horror filmmakers are getting their movies made, while deconstructing their methods and career strategies into practical insights that you can use on your own horror filmmaking journey. This includes their creative processes, funding resources, favorite books and tools, key life lessons, and much, much more. I have a very special episode in store today, one that should put a smile on all of your faces. That's right, Parker Finn is in the house. Parker is a man who should need no introduction for us horror fans, as the director behind one of this year's breakout hits, Smile. First of all, I owe an enormous thank you to my friend Joe Russo, who made this interview happen. Joe, you're the best, and I thank you very, very much. So Parker has obviously been doing a lot of interviews recently, and I made a real effort to make my questions as unique as possible. As a result, we got into a lot of the details around the craft of Smile, including how he worked with his actors, how he worked with his DP, his approach to the edit, and his keys to crafting effective scares, amongst other things. One thing we didn't get into very much was the overall origin story about how Smile, Parker's very first feature, came to be. The story's been told quite a few times, but I will give you the short version right here. In 2020, after struggling as a filmmaker in Los Angeles for about 8 years, Parker made a short film called Laura Hasn't Slept for about $30,000. Laura Hasn't Slept ultimately got into South by Southwest, where it won the Grand Jury Award, and shortly thereafter got the attention of Paramount, who then offered Parker the opportunity to direct a feature adaptation, which turned into Smile. Smile was originally intended to go straight to streaming on Paramount+, but after a series of overwhelmingly positive audience reaction tests, Smile was given a wide theatrical release. To date, Smile has made over $200 million at the box office, making it one of the highest-grossing horror movies of all time, which, for a first-time director, is really fucking cool. For a more comprehensive deep dive into Parker's origin story, definitely check out Mick Garris's conversation with Parker on the Postmortem podcast. I listened to that right before doing this interview to make sure we didn't cover the same ground, so the two are very complementary if you want a fuller picture. Anyhow, without further ado, here is the director of Smile, Mr. Parker Finn. Parker, great to see you. How's it going?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Good. Thank you for being here. Really, really psyched to talk to you. As a first-time director, $200+ million at the box office. It's got to feel good. I feel like we're in this wonderful era for horror, and I feel like the horror crowd pleaser is back. There's Smile, there's Barbarian, Terrifier 2, Pearl, X. I mean, there's so much incredible stuff that's out now when it comes to horror. What was opening weekend like for you?
Yeah, so I snuck into like two theaters opening weekend, and both here in LA, and mean, there were primetime showings, but both were sold out. So that was like the best way to see the movie, was with a totally packed house. It was incredible. It was so, you spend all this time making something, like loving it so dearly, holding it so close, and then finally you're sort of like handing it over to the world, and it's like, it's no longer yours. It doesn't belong to you as the filmmaker anymore. It's the audience's now, for better or worse. And, it's really gratifying to like be in the room and hear the movie sort of, doing its thing on people, and hearing all of the screams and the laughs and all that stuff. It was really fun. But I mean, yeah, opening weekend was really, I was just like a total bundle of nerves.
I can imagine.
It was my first time through it, and you just have no idea how people are going to react to it. So yeah, it was very exciting, but very nerve wracking at the same time.
Nice. So this being your first feature, and with a studio like Paramount, what did you do to prepare? Because clearly, you've been working as a filmmaker for a long time, but what steps did you take to prep for an undertaking like this once you got the green light?
I mean, I'd made shorts previously, and like that was a really good training ground for myself. But what I discovered is there's very little that can prepare you to step into directing a studio feature. I mean, we are, for a studio film, it's a modest, I guess, kind of modest budget. I mean, I'm well aware that like as a first time filmmaker, I had like enormous resources compared to most.
Yeah.
I'm extremely grateful and lucky that happened. But still, I mean, it was huge. It was, everything was sort of made a million times bigger, like every there's a million more decisions you have to make. There's so many more people that you're working with. There is, the stakes are much, much, much higher when you're spending somebody else's millions of dollars.
Yeah.
But, it was really about, I tend to be somebody who goes very, very, very hard on prep. I love prep. It's one of my, the part of the process that feels, really, really important to me. And, everything from like, I shot list my whole script before I get into production. I love to be, I sort of feel like there's no version of being over prepared. And it's like worth it for me. It's always worth, just like constantly working at the project, even though, when you're in prep, you're spending how many hours a day in the production office, but then, I would go home at night and I'd keep working on whatever it is I was working on. And just, it sort of like has to become the only thing in your life while
Right.
you're doing it. Which is what's great about going, when we went and shot this movie in New Jersey, and I live in Los Angeles. And so what's great is that, I was in this tiny little apartment in Hoboken. So like, there was nothing else for me to do.
Right,
it was
right.
just like, I could take my work home with me, and I didn't have to like think about like, like the mail piling up or any of the other stuff. But I digress. I think it's a huge step, and you sort of have to like be able to break it down in kind of like workable little chunks, so that
Yeah.
you're kind of building the movie brick by brick, so that you're as prepared as possible when you get to day one.
Makes sense. And you, your kind of origin story has been well told. You did a very comprehensive backstory with on Mix podcast, and obviously your short was a really big door opener for you. You put a lot of time, effort, money into it. It looks awesome. It did really, really well at South by, and it seemed to lead to a lot of doors being open. So from that perspective, what do you think filmmakers should put into their shorts? Because it seems like it's a calling card, and it should showcase your sensibility, and it should showcase your either showmanship. Like, what are the things that you feel are important to put into your short so that it can be that effective door opener?
Yeah, I mean, It's hard to say because like, it's like, um, it's kind of like asking like, what sort of, you know, what do you want to put into a house to build the best house? It's like, well, I don't know, what kind of house do you want to have?
Yeah, it makes sense.
For sort of my perspective on it is that, I think a short should hopefully feel like you want to feel that the filmmaker behind it was like deeply passionate about it, and that it was something that they wanted to make for its own sake. I think that a lot, like anything that feels sort of like, somebody is trying to scheme with a short, or they're trying to create something that is just like a commercial for something bigger, or they're trying to jump on some kind of recent trend with shorts. Like, I feel like David F. Sandberg, like, really just, fucked up a whole generation of short filmmakers with Lights Out, because suddenly there was like, 10,000 different sort of knockoffs of Lights Out floating around out there. But like that, that was his thing, in the way that it was so fresh when he did it.
Right.
I think, people were trying to like chase that, be like, oh, he did that, so it's like, that's all I have to do is like make another Lights Out. But it's like, Lights Out is like the Beatles. It's only going to happen once,
Yeah.
So I think that it's really important that like short films should be sort of like an authentic expression of who the filmmaker like wants to be, like what they want to do, what they're really interested in. I think like more practically, for example, the things that I find sort of really successful with shorts is, I think a short should have at least, one thing inside of it where the viewer is like caught off guard, that like, oh wow, I can't believe they were able to pull this off in a short.
Right.
I think like that is always really like sort of turns heads, where somebody is like, oh wow, like how did they do that as a short film? Like that's really interesting. And then I think, the other side of it is, if you're making horror shorts, I think trying to do like one thing really well, rather than a whole bunch of stuff, or tell a whole big long story. If you can kind of tell a short that is like one movement, one expression of something, those tend to feel really successful, because the short form is so, it's hard, like you can't like shove a whole feature story into it. It's
Right.
hard. It's like you kind of want to just tell one thing. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, it's super helpful. I think it makes a lot of sense, because I think with shorts, especially when people put money into it, they want it, throw everything, but the kitchen sink at it. But I think having that singularity of vision seems like it's a really important thing to just showcase, your ability to focus as a director, if anything, because that seems like it's critical. Would love to get into the craft of smile. I remember you in a previous interview had talked about how you don't find a horror movie scary unless you genuinely care about the characters. So would love to hear about how you crafted the characters, because the way the movie operates, I've seen it twice now, and the second time, was in the context of this interview. You don't weigh the movie down with a lot of exposition or, all this character building, but you really care about Rose. You get a good sense of everything, but the movie flies like a bullet too. It moves. It's a rapid pace. But it still does have a lot of emotional gravity. So would love to hear about your approach to crafting characters that you care about, but also your approach to crafting like a really formidable, for lack of a better term, villain or monster or, threat in this case.
I mean, for me, I always try to, with features, I'm always trying to start with character. I think that, it's sort of what I find the most compelling. I mean, like I love the stuff that goes bump in the night, but for me, I think it's all sort of needs to be filtered through the lens of the character, because that lets me know sort of like how to feel about it. And I Rose's story was one that just sort of like had its hooks in me that I was like really, interested to tell. And, I think it's about, because the movie goes to such really like heightened, kind of extraordinary, crazy places, it was always really important to me to start the character really like grounded and honest feeling, and somebody that hopefully I put a lot of myself into Rose, and I'm hoping that like some people might be able to relate to her and feel like they understand what it is that she's going through and feeling and experiencing, and and it's just about, for me, when I'm sort of crafting the story, it's where she's at like as a character is sort of driving the plot versus the other way around. At least that's my approach. That's what I find interesting. And then on the flip side of that coin, as far as like the creating the idea of the sort of the smiler in the film, it was sort of like fine tuned to be like the worst thing for Rose. Like that was like a big part of its design and what it does and how it's operating, was to be like, what is the worst version of this sort of like supernatural entity curse thing that, like for Rose specifically. Yeah. So that was kind of how I built that out. And then just, I always look inwards at like what scares me and what I think would be fun and what an audience might, I love to sort of, if I can, teach an audience to how to watch a film, and then start upending that and changing that as it goes along, so that I can hopefully like, keep them on their toes or knock them back on their heels constantly. I think like that's a really fun way to approach an antagonist like in Smile.
Well, that's interesting. So teach the audience how to view a certain film. Is that a matter of like lulling them into a sense of them thinking they know where things are going and then pulling the rug out from under them?
Yeah, exactly. And like, because for me, I like to think that it can work both ways, that like you can get them extra nervous about something when now they're like, oh man, like now I understand what the film is doing. And that's freaking me out because, I'm really nervous about the thing that I know that's coming. Right. And then when you shift it and suddenly it's like, oh no, like I didn't know that the film could do this. I don't know. It's a fun way of sort of like toying with expectations. Hopefully if it's done correctly. Yeah. Yeah. So this was hands down the scariest movie of the year. It's genuinely really, really terrifying. Thank you.
I clearly watch a lot of horror. I think it's hard to scare audiences now because I feel like audiences have a real sense of, they know when a jump scare is coming. They kind of have that jump scare radar. They've seen a lot of plots and a lot of concepts and devices. And, the weathered horror fan is tough to scare. And I think that you did some very unique, scary things. So I was wondering about the craft of crafting fright in this case. I mean, you talked about the villain. I think there is something very terrifying about being stalked by some entity that only you can see, that completely upends your entire life, like in your movie and like in Candyman, where you're the only one who sees it, and just that alone is terrifying. But curious about how you built the fear element.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. That means a lot. I always I always start with like, again, looking inward at what scares me. I think that, the idea of something coming into your life and then systematically pulling it apart and isolating you and, putting you in a place where nobody around you believes you, like that terrifies me. I think not being believed is probably a universal fear. But, I think that there's with the, like, I love a good jump scare. I know that there's a lot of people that will never enjoy a jump scare, and that is fine, and everybody is totally welcome to their own tastes and opinion. But, for me, I think a jump scare should be hopefully well-earned or have, like a really great sort of like setup and unexpected payoff. That the timing and pacing of that is really important. Or, like sometimes there's like a fun thing to do, like to if you're trying to mess with the audience a little bit, there can be some amount of like irony to it or something like that. But when I was like looking at why the film is sort of filled with jump scares, I really wanted to sort of pair Rose's experience with the audience's experience. So this like supernatural thing that comes into her life, its whole plan is to traumatize her and over and over again and break her down so that like it can get her to the place where it can sort of like fully engulf her.
Yeah.
And so the idea for me in this was to sort of like, thematically, I wanted the jump scares to be working on the audience the same way that it's like we are experiencing what Rose is experiencing. We're going through that same thing. We're being sort of like systematically worn down by this and sort of like traumatized over and over, so that we also get to the place that Rose is at the end of the film. That was sort of like the concept behind it, but what's important outside of the jump scares, at least for me, but more important, honestly, is the I wanted to build this like creeping sense of dread and anxiety that just permeates everything, that just like doesn't let go of the viewer. I was hoping that like from the opening frame, people would sort of, feel off kilter and get uncomfortable, and that like, I can just keep like ratcheting that more and more and more so that like, they're just, upside down in their seats by the third act of the film, with discomfort. That was the goal.
Yeah.
And then these moments of these big jumps that come in, they punctuate that, but there's hopefully no like real relief after them either. That there's this sense of like, well, it's still not safe,
right?
And yeah, and then the other like a third element of that is also my DP Charlie Sroff and I and my editor Elliot Greenberg, we talked a lot about negative space and like how we can build just this like gnawing sense of fear about what might happen constantly. There was a big part of that went into crafting the film, that like things that don't happen but getting the audience nervous that something might constantly.
Right. Well, from that perspective, how much of crafting the tension and the anxiety, how much of that is intuition versus like science? Like, in other words, did you have any sort of kind of analytical beat sheets like, okay, we let a little tension out here and now we have to ratchet it up? Or was it just a matter of, intuition? How much of that is science versus intuition?
Yeah, I think it's intuition. I think it's instinct. The like when you're, at least for me, when I'm writing, and when we're in production, we're sort of, all that stuff is in the script, and then we sort of hold that as the guiding light for how we're doing everything in production. And then when you get into post, of course, when you're in the edit, you then go in and start fine tuning and changing and really making it work. So I think like to create it and capture it is all instinct and intuition, and then when you're in post, like you have the opportunity to take what you've done and finesse it into place. And sometimes, I think a scare or even like a scary scene is, it's like a joke or a funny scene where like it doesn't really work on you as the person who put it together and sees where all of the Band-Aids and stuff are. So you have to also start like testing it on people. So we would have either like the assistant editor or somebody else like come in and plop them down on the couch and like just constantly be testing stuff and see if we could get reactions. And,
that's awesome.
And, what was working and stuff like that. So.
Well, I'd love to talk about your collaborators and how you worked with them, and namely your DP Charlie Saroff, who did Relic, which I was a really big fan of, but also your editor, who I believe was on set with you, right? Didn't you have your editor present throughout the course of shooting?
No, so Elliot Greenberg, my editor, he was back in LA, and they were piping dailies.
Oh, okay, got it.
Over to him every day, and so we would connect. Like I would call him from set sometimes, to talk through something. But then on the weekends, we were getting on this sort of like remote editing program, Evercast, and he was sort of showing me the mess I had made that week. And just making sure that we were accountable for everything. But no, once I got back, I jumped right into the suite with him, like literally I don't know, 2 days after I got back. Yeah, so he was not on set, but we were talking constantly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I mean, my Charlie, my DP, and I, we started very early on talking through everything. I mean, like I said earlier, I for me, I'm a very heavy shot lister. I don't like. I'm not a fan of like shooting standard coverage. I really like to sort of like try to make everything as bespoke as I possibly can, and allow the camera to really be part of telling the story and helping the audience sort of like feel what I'm hoping to make them feel. But so we did a lot of work together early on and all the way through prep, just constantly refining what we were going to do and figuring out how can we, and of course there's a lot of like, we watched a lot of movies, we traded a lot of references, we talked a lot about lighting, but we sort of we created a set of rules for ourselves to sort of follow throughout the whole thing that involved, how we were going to shoot Rose, how we were going to shoot the environments, how we were going to shoot anybody that she's talking to, and sort of creating this like really, really specific visual film language. And then sticking to that. And that was definitely sort of like a really important thing that went beyond just myself and Charlie. I mean, the same sort of thing with like my production designer, Lester Cohen, and costume designer, Alexis Forte. It was all about like trying to create sort of like this sort of singular look and feel to the film. And then, Elliot and I, we talked a lot about on the front side of like what I was hoping the film would feel like, and how certain scenes would feel, and how they could play, and the mix of tones. I wanted to create a film that is like, it's like, hopefully like it's designed to scare you.
Yeah.
Like that was the idea, but that like tension and anxiety and dread were like a huge backbone to the whole thing. But also like, I really love, if I can get an audience like sort of like squirming and laughing nervously, I love that. Like if people are both like really freaked out and laughing at the same time, I love like little moments that can come like unexpectedly in the film, where like the laugh is the goal, and yet people still leave it unsettled. Like that's really fun for me. But pacing was a big discussion that we had, myself and my editor, and about like letting certain moments live and breathe, and like the way that we were going to stay in certain shots, and it's all a learning curve. But I think like once you start putting it together, like the film starts telling you what it wants to be, and like hopefully all the stuff you did during prep and production is translating to post. I mean, of course you're changing things at that point, but that like you've sort of created a pathway for yourself.
Very cool. So throughout the course of the movie, there's so many scenes and depictions of human drama that are really, really intense. And I'm wondering, what was your, and observing them, watching the movie the second time, I couldn't help but think like, wow, this is really, really emotionally very strong and very raw, but this so easily could have gone off the rails. If it was like 1% off, the level of believability just would not have been as effective. And I feel like it's such a razor thin margin, between being over the top, not being emotional enough. And I felt like, the movie just absolutely nailed the human drama element. So I was wondering, how did you work with your actors, specifically Sosie, on being able to bring her to such a deep, dark place so many times throughout the movie? I mean, things just get worse and worse for her, but her emotions are just palpably raw and feel really, really real. So I'm wondering, what was that process like with her?
Yeah, well, I'm happy that you said that. I mean, so like I made this movie to sort of be, a bit of like a love letter to like the sort of like Curse Chain movies that I've always found like really fun and something very creepy about that idea. But they're ridiculous. Like the external plot elements are so absurd that I feel like, I wanted to see if I could do that, but also like really, really ground a character that you cared about in the middle of all of that, and make it feel like it has some weight. And so, yeah, that was where, all that character melodrama, that's all the stuff that really interests me. And I love that all that's happening in the middle of this really ridiculous thing. And, working with Sosie, I mean, one of the reasons that I cast Sosie in the role was because, she, when we first met, she was just saying, all the right things about how, the way she was thinking about story and character and the script was really, really smart and really mature. And she has such a great grasp of storytelling. And then she was looking for something that was going to challenge her and scare her as an actor. And this role is like really, really difficult. I mean, Rose is in almost every single scene of the film, almost every frame. And she's gotta, what Sosie's so good at is that she can really ground that character, draw an audience in, make them empathize with her, but then is totally able to go to these really heightened, really, really intense places. Exactly like you said, she's operating at these at a 10 of like fear, anxiety, melodrama, dread, all that stuff constantly. And through the course of the shoot, she's playing every single day and like there for almost the whole day. And like, our turnaround as a company is basically her turnaround as an actor.
Right.
So it's all sort of like designed around her, but it's just about being in constant communication. And we talked so much about the role beforehand. And then, just creating a system of trust between us where I'm trusting her to be able to go to these places, and she's trusting me to make sure that like I am curating the performance. Cause like you said, it could so easily go wrong.
Right.
But it's this give and take. And, I was so lucky to have such a great partner in Sosie with that.
Awesome. Last few questions. So throughout the course of your career, did you have any mentors that were particularly helpful either in orienting you with the business of movies or the creative element of movies or how to navigate Hollywood, anything like that? Were there any pivotal mentor figures for you?
I think the big part for me living in LA, I had been in LA for 8 years before I sold Smile. And it's this like constant onslaught of like rejection or like close but no cigar. And then like, it's a really brutal thing. I would say what was most sort of helpful to me rather than like specific mentor figures was like my peer group. I would say, like a lot of friends that I moved out here with from school and people that I met out here, really, close friends who were all sort of chasing different versions of the same thing out here. That for me was like one of the most important things that helped me keep going was the sort of friends I had around myself who were doing the same thing. I mean, it's a great, I'm reading my friends' scripts, they're reading mine, I'm working on their shorts, they're working on mine, all that kind of stuff. That to me was like one of the biggest parts to keep going, I would say.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And were there any books or resources that were particularly helpful for you from a career or creative perspective?
I don't know about like a career perspective. Because here's the thing is that honestly, the industry is changing so rapidly now that like any book immediately becomes stale.
Right.
You read like, I read like William Goldman's like Adventures in the Screen Trade, which is like an awesome read, but like next to useless now, really. I mean, there's just nothing that is very helpful there. And like, I'm not a big, I've never found like books on craft to be particularly insightful. I think you really learn it by watching a lot of movies and then doing it yourself.
Yeah.
One book that I have returned to a few times that I think I find endlessly inspiring and helpful is Stephen King's On Writing. It's first of all, even if you're not aspiring to be a writer, it's just if you like Stephen King, it's a fantastic read. But it's an insight to him as like a working writer, but also talks about like everything that he's dealing with in life around the writing, and how he still carves out time to do it. And I will never be able to write at the clip that Stephen King does, but I recommend that book to anybody who's either interested in Stephen King or in pursuing writing or the creative fields.
A real fun move is to get it on Audible, because he does the dictation, and it's like
cool.
Yeah, it's like you're sitting having a beer with him. It's so cool, and his intonation and everything. It feels so personal. Yeah, so that's a real treat if you've already read the book. So last question. So before Spielberg does any movie, there's 4 movies he will always watches. I think I can name them. It's Lawrence of Arabia, The Searchers, Seven Samurai, and It's a Wonderful Life. What was your cinema diet like when approaching Smile?
Let's see, man. Mine's going to sound like a big pile of shit compared to Spielberg's. But
well, anything that kind of grounds you in your own sensibility.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, there were a few films that I was thinking about specifically when I was writing Smile and getting ready to make it. I mean, and I've talked about these before, but Todd Haynes' Safe is like one of my favorite films. The way that he really places you in the anxiety of Julianne Moore's character and gets you to question what's real and what's not. That was hugely influential on Smile for me. Rosemary's Baby, the way that character is sort of being acted upon by everyone else around her, and being told that she's wrong and being gaslit. I find that really, that was something I was trying to achieve with Rose. And I also find that, a lot of the blocking and camera movement in that film is incredibly inspiring. And then, another film that I've talked about previously, but that I love that was on my mind was Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cure. I love Japanese horror in general, but there's something about that film that just feels so nightmarish to me. And I loved that atmosphere. It's like mesmeric and it's really strange. And then it also pairs it with the detective angle that I loved. And then, a movie that I'm always thinking about that's one of my favorite films of all time is The Shining.
Yeah.
I think, Kubrick's level of control over everything is something that I'll be chasing forever as a filmmaker. And I've seen that movie a million times, and every time I watch it, I pick up something new out of it. So that I find that movie so inspiring to watch before I'm going into production, because it's like, it's a very lofty thing to look at, to be like, I just want to nip at its heels, which is like impossible to do. But those are 4 movies that I think, I was definitely thinking about when I was going into Smile.
Very, very cool. Any parting wisdom for those aspiring filmmakers out there?
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm just some asshole that made a movie, so I don't know that if I'm some beacon of sage wisdom, but for me, what I found helpful was there's a lot of noise out there that sort of tells you this is popular, this is what you should be doing, this is the sort of thing, this is how you make it in the film industry. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in all of that. I mean, there's a whole cottage industry around aspiring screenwriters that I find sort of weird and gross. But for me, what I thought was really important was just sort of ignoring all of the stuff and the stress of what everyone else is doing, and just being what is it that really interests me as a filmmaker? What is it that I came out here to do?
Yeah.
What made me fall in love with films in the first place? And just do that thing that you really love and pour all of yourself into it. And, if it's good, somebody will notice, and you'll have made something that is uniquely you. And that's one of the most important things.
Awesome. Perfect place to end. Thank you again. This was awesome.
Oh, thank you, man. This is great. I appreciate it.
All right. Here, as always, are some key takeaways from this conversation with Parker Finn. Number 1, do one thing really well in your short. Parker's short Laura Hasn't Slept is excellent and was the catalyst that led him to getting Smile made. You can actually watch Laura Hasn't Slept on the upcoming Smile Blu-ray release or for free on YouTube right now. I actually added a link in the show notes. When it comes to shorts, Parker claims that a lot of filmmakers try to make their shorts do too many things, when instead focusing on doing one thing really, really effectively is what makes shorts stand out. Focusing your forces allows your shorts to go deep instead of wide, which is suitable for the short form medium, which is intended to be a single act, a single movement, and therefore is best suited for a single focus. Parker also recommends pulling off things that are not typical or really difficult to do in your shorts to show what you're capable of as a director. Number 2, start with character and then throw the worst case scenario at them. Parker has spoken at length about how the scariest horror movies are the most powerful when you care about the characters that the terrible things are happening to. Horror filmmakers must be effective dramatists first, by enabling the audience to empathize with their characters. Effective horror works through empathy, because if done right, your audience will experience the terror through your characters. With this in mind, it's critical to ground your characters with honesty and relatability so the audience can connect with them up front. If you fail to properly build empathy, the audience will simply observe your characters from the perspective of a detached third party, which just isn't as scary as experiencing the horror through them firsthand. Next, once you figure out who your characters are and make the audience care, design and fine-tune the horror element to be the worst case scenario for them specifically. Number 3, follow intuition on set and science in post. Parker mentions that when crafting fear, he typically relies on his intuition when shooting, but then applies more analytical thinking when approaching things like building tension and scares in the edit. Horror relies on a critical balance between science and intuition, left brain and right brain thinking. To craft fear, you need to have an inherent human understanding of what is frightening. In addition, it's important to recognize that horror is a seduction, one that relies very heavily on pacing, which is why your editor is one of your most important collaborators. Also, it's near impossible to be objective about how scary your own movie is because you're likely to be way too close to it. So you may want to do what Parker did and test your scares. Parker would sit people down to watch certain scenes during the edit and observe whether or not they would actually get scared. Number 4, don't get caught up in the noise. Parker reflects on his years in Hollywood and constantly hearing all manner of bad advice for filmmakers, of which there is no shortage. He also observed multiple industries aimed at exploiting aspiring screenwriters and filmmakers with really crappy resources and products. Parker considers all of this to be a bunch of noise and says it's important for directors to phase it all out. He recommends focusing on you as an artist. What speaks to you? What are you most interested in, and what will you be able to focus obsessively on in your movies? These are typically the kinds of projects that break the most new ground because they're personal, unique, and the directors care way more about them, so they're going to work harder on them, and they're going to be more powerful projects. Phasing out the noise can help you individuate your vision in films so they can really stand out in the industry. These are the kind of films that the industry needs, and the kinds of films that fans prefer. And honestly, given the recent success of films like Smile, Terrifier 2, and Barbarian, right now could not be a better time for original horror. All right, episode 100 in the bag. A big, huge thank you to you, dear listener. Without you and your support, this podcast would simply not be possible. Looks like I'm going to be taking a short break before coming back with season 4, but in the meantime, keep in touch and keep those cameras rolling. Thanks again for listening to the Nick Taylor Horror Show.